everyone, I'm Dan.
I'm Robin.
I'm Gaurav.
And our project is comparative observation of learning or attention. The basic idea was Robin's friend works in the Denver public school system, and he observes troubled students and collects data on how they're acting in the classroom setting. Right now he's still doing it all by hand, so he asked if we can make an app to better collect the data and store it all into a database. So that's what we did. We wrote a phone application using the PhoneGap programming interface or framework. We have it working on a phone, but it was too hard to record the demo here, so we decided to instead do a screen capture of our developing environment here. So this is what it looks like. This is the front page. This is where you enter in the student information. So you enter in the student ID and various other features or attributes. So every field with a star is required. So if you try and save it to the database, it will pop up an error saying that you need to fill in all the required fields. But if we do that, and like this, we can save that to the database. So now when we clear and enter in that same student ID, it will fill in all the information for us automatically. In addition to that, you enter in the teacher and the classroom information for the session you're about to use when you're observing the student. So I can enter in a teacher, a class, and an observer, so the person using the app, in the observer title. And we can save that and click Next. Next will also save to the database, and that will move us on to the observation screen.
So the observation screen is the place in the application where the data collection for the target student or the comparison peer happens. The target student is the student who is under observation, and comparison peer is any student around the target student that gets selected randomly. When you come to the observation screen, you get to actually select what are the settings for the observation screen. The settings for the observation screens are either you can select how long the application is going to run. The options are 15, 30, 45, 60 minutes. Or after selecting the total time of observation, you also get to select the frequency of data collection that happens. So if you select 15 seconds, then you will be prompted, you will have 15 seconds to collect data every time. If you select 30 seconds, you will get 30 seconds to collect data for the target student and the comparison peer. So hypothetically, if I were to select 60 minutes for total time and 60 minutes for the frequency, then the total number of data collection that happens is 60, because you're collecting data against the target student once per every minute. And since there are 60 minutes in an hour, you're collecting 60 data points. But one thing to note is when you're selecting frequency, you can only do this at the very beginning of the application, meaning that once you've already selected start, or once you hit start, you won't be able to change the frequency at which the data collection happens. So let's say that if I were to select 45 seconds for the frequency, and then for total time, if I were to select 60 seconds, the application does the math and it says that there will be 80 data collection points. If I start the application, then the timer goes on, and if I pause it, then I go back to the settings screen, I can't change the frequency at this point. I can still change the time. There's logic in the application where if you go past 15 minutes, then you won't be able to select 15 minutes at the total observation time. So if you select that, and then once you can resume the application. Once you do that, there are the bunch of traits that are listed under the target student tab and the comparison peer. What happens is the first 5 traits under target student and comparison peer, these are known as the on-task or off-task behavior. The first two tabs represent the on-task behavior. The remaining 3 represent the off-task behavior. And you can only select one. You can only select either on-task or off-task behavior. You can only make one selection at a time because it doesn't make sense for a student to be on-task and off-task at the same time. However, for aggressive and out-of-seat, you can select that either or both of them at any time. So since I selected for frequency, I selected 45 seconds. That's why the application. That's why the button selection refreshed after 45 seconds, and after that you can collect data for collect another data point, and this will refresh after another 45 seconds. While that's happening, you can also select what kind of activity is happening in the classroom. So whether or not it's a whole group instruction, small group instruction, whether they're in transition. And all this information, like the drop-down menu information and the information about how long the observation will happen, and the frequency of the observation, all that information has actually come from Brian, because Brian is already using a Excel version of this observation right now. So that's where all the information is coming from. One thing that's happening in this particular page is we're using the event listener capability of JavaScript that works as observer pattern. And when we hit the start button, the settings and the stop buttons are basically listening for start button to be pressed. As soon as I hit that, the listeners then go into action and then disable the pressing of the settings button or the stop button, so nothing happens. And if you pause it, and once you pause it, the buttons become re-enabled. At that point, you can select the buttons, and then the settings screen comes up. And if you can also press the stop button, which will prompt you and ask a question whether or not you want to stop the observation. If you want to stop the observation, you can go ahead and click OK. If you don't want to stop observation and resume the observation, then you can select cancel, and this takes you back to the screen, the observation screen. So that's what's going on in the background here. So the way the application works is you can either preempt the timer and then just select OK and go to the next page, or you can let the timer run for 60 minutes. At that point, it just transitions into the next page without prompting you anything. So right now, we're not going to wait for 60 minutes for the application to finish the observation, so we'll just preempt it, and it takes us to the summary screen.
The summary screen shows the summary of all the observed data in the last page. It shows the comparison between comparison peer and the target student, and it shows the whole categories like observing, participating to the off-task behavior. And here you can see the data in percentage, and it also provides you the opportunity to edit something that in case you feel that you have missed in the student information page. So if I want to change the name of observer, for example, I just have to edit the text box and click save. And after that, we can move to the questionnaire screen by pressing next, and the data is saved in the data layer.
So in the questionnaire screen, this is where all the optional questions for the observation is asked. This is sort of like the metadata for all the observation data that gets collected in the observation screen. So there will be questions about like whether, like what helps the student to stay on task and what makes student go off task and things like that. So the observer can basically type in the responses saying anything that the observer prefers. There's a 500 character limit on the responses, so that the observer doesn't go on typing an essay in these text boxes, because the purpose of this text boxes is to get some more information or metadata for the observation and not have an essay written in the response boxes. Anything to. So you can select the drop-down menus and all. So what Brian wanted when you're in this particular observation screen was to give the ability to the user to navigate back to the summary screen just in case they wanted to look at some of the collected data or the summary data and have all the responses saved. So we've actually implemented that too. So if you press back, you go back to the summary screen where you can reference a table that shows all the observation data that was collected in the observation screen. As you can also see here, that the information that was changed gets saved, and the updated information is displayed up in the observation summary screen. But if you were to go back to the questionnaire screen, you still have the responses that you typed before, along with whatever values were selected for the drop-down menu. When you're in this particular screen, you can hit the save button, and this is what saves all the information that's been collected so far in the application to the database. When you hit save, just to prevent people from accidentally hitting the save button and saving the information to a database, it prompts you asking if you want to save the information to a database. If you choose cancel, it's pretty obvious. You come back to the same screen, and then you can do further editing And if you're done with the application, you can basically hit save, and it takes you back to the first page of the application.
This is the class diagram of our project, and we have created total 8 classes. 4 are for the 4 page screens that we have developed. These are student info controller, observation controller, summary controller, and questionnaire screen controller. And one is for the database, that is database controller, and 3 classes settings, timer, and system settings are in the composition of observation controller as their parent. And the setting class, what it does is it just sets the frequency and the total number of observations uh, that you set in the observation screen. And the timer class sets the time settings for the system time and the clock settings. And the system settings class, what is does it's save and retrieves the timestamps for the observation screen. And the database controller class is just for the database, and we wanted to implement singleton pattern with the database, but since PhoneGap doesn't allow to create a global object, so we created 2 objects of database, one for the student information screen and another one for the questionnaire screen.
So finally, we're going to look at the SQL schema that we use for the database. So the database consists of 4 different tables. One for the student information that contains the student ID, which is the primary key, and all of the student attributes here. So every student attribute is just associated with one student ID. Next, we have a separate table for each for the sessions, so a separate row for each session. That's like starting the app and running through a set of observations. Each one of these sessions has a session ID that's created automatically. That's the primary key. Each session is associated with a single student, so the student ID is a foreign key, so that this student info table can be connected to the sessions table or joined. In addition to that, all the sessions have the teacher, class, and the various settings of the app itself contained in this sessions table. So each sessions table is going to be associated with an observations table. So each row in the observation is an interval during the actual collection of data. So that's like when Robin was showing the data resetting after 45 seconds. That's a single row in this observations table. Again, the session ID is a foreign key, so it connects back to each session in the sessions table, every set of observation. And then we have all the information about how the student was behaving at the various intervals. And finally, we have a separate table for the questions. Again, the session ID is a foreign key, so it can associate a set of rows, so a set of questions to each session, and that will be saved to the database in the questionnaire screen.